Yeah, when I do think it's a tricky thing about Russ, whereas you're right, the contrast between the 2 was obvious, and I think that, caused friction ultimately in the locker room because there was this juxtaposition between this guy who was perceived to be the most authentic guy any of them had ever been around versus this inauthentic guy, at least perceived to be. Whereas I think Russ was being himself. I think being himself was that kind of like move like a politician attitude. He was doing press conferences when he was like 6 and 7 with his dad, like he was bred to be a quarterback. When you really dig into Russ's like background, you kind of see that he wasn't actually being phony, he was just being who he was trained to be. And that's a lot of us, a lot of us are what our parents taught us to be. They just usually don't teach you to be like a quarterback, but there are some people who grow up in politics and they are bred to basically be a sentient press release, when they're out in public. And it's kind of what Russ was, but just guys just didn't rock with that. And I think paired with the authenticity of Marshawn, I think that it really just, stood out. With Marshawn, it was just this love of others, too, though they felt that he loved them, that he would do something for them. I got all these examples in my book of, I have all these chapters about Marshawn called something mode, beast mode, whatever mode. I have one called benevolent mode, where he just does good for others, whether it's something formal, informal, spontaneous, like whether it's, disobeying team rules to stay in Dallas at the hospital with Ricardo Lockett after he broke his neck. There's just all these examples, and that meant something to them. On top of him being just a genuinely authentic person. So yeah, that was like the tone of the team. Like if Marshawn could be himself, we can all be ourselves. And then they saw this one guy wearing number 3 they didn't feel was being himself. I would disagree. I think he was, but it's not the point. They perceived him to not be himself, and that did ultimately cause problems and made Marshawn one of the most beloved people. I would argue in like the history of the league. Like he's
Yeah,
like the NFL Snoop Dogg. Like he's the most recognizable and everyone
exactly.
loves him. And like you said, you can put him next to whoever and it'll be authentic, genuine conversation and content.